Great. Thanks, Matt. And thanks, everyone. Nice to see a bunch of old friends and newer friends and some people I don't recognize. So it's nice to meet those of you I haven't met before. Um, I will share my screen. That come up.
Yes.
Good. All right, here we go. So, I should say, Matt, you said climate impacts to our drinking water. I just want to be clear, I don't have specific data on Rockland County's water, so this is more broad, looking at how climate change will impact surface water and drinking water supplies. But I think, it should be relevant to the reservoirs in the county in certain ways. So you'll be able to help connect those dots a little bit. Um, Riverkeeper, I think you all know our organization, but we have been around, I guess, close to 60 years now and work on protecting and restoring the Hudson River and safeguarding drinking water supplies. And we do that with advocacy, science, and law as sort of our foundational strategies. You can hear me all right, right? I'm using new headphones. It's good.
Yes.
Good.
All
All
good.
right. Great. So what I'm gonna go over here today is sort of an overview of what's coming out in a report um, that we've been saying is coming soon for quite a while, but it really is coming soon, probably a couple months. It'll be available on our website, but it basically takes the New York State Climate Impacts Assessment that was completed about a year ago, and tries to, draw out some key facts from that, as well as build on it with knowledge that, what didn't get incorporated or is more localized to try to focus on this issue of how climate change is going to affect water quality, um, especially for our drinking water sources. So we look at a watershed perspective, what risks in the watershed and are going to interact with those changes in the climate and how those are going to affect water quality. And our hope is that this will help to catalyze conversations especially like in the Drinking Water Source Protection Program and other places where we're looking at climate adaptation or water protection. And, basically what we were seeing is that that conversation, those two conversations were happening. They're both really important, but they weren't sort of happening together enough where we weren't, we're planning for protection, but we're not thinking about all the climate impacts. So maybe we're not setting the right sort of understanding in our planning without that understanding. So we're trying to fill that gap a little bit and really raise this issue as something that we want to see our communities be able to understand enough that we can start to plan for. We got support from the Hudson River Estuary Program, great agency within the agency of DEC that does a lot of great work to support planning and implementation of projects across a range of issues. So if you're not already working with the Estuary Program, I'm sure you are, but make sure you do because they're really leaders in our region. So we set out to try to define what we meant by good quality drinking water. And of course, the obvious way to do this is just to say, does it meet standards? And we know we have federal and state standards, mostly federal, and that's the basic test. And we can look across the region, and mo for the most part, that's we are doing that with our drinking water. But there are a couple nuances that are important. We feel, and I think if you look at polling data drinking water quality is always the top of the list for people out there saying, what are environmental concerns? And it's like drinking water quality is at the top. So what does it mean to really have good quality drinking water? And so the standards as we think of them are really based on maximum contaminant levels. And those are set by the EPA typically or our New York State Department of Health. And those are defined at levels to protect us from getting ill, acutely ill, or, more concerning like from chronic exposure to getting a higher risk of developing cancer or other chronic illnesses. So when the agency sets those maximum contaminant levels, the EPA, it's in the rules of the road for them that they consider both the health impacts and the health concerns, but also the cost of reducing those impacts. So in some cases, the cost is not prohibitive, so protecting health uh, and cost sort of arrives at the same number, and we regulate to that number, and we protect drinking water to that threshold, and we can all feel good about that. In other cases, the um, the health threshold alone would be hard to meet. It would be expensive to meet. So the EPA sets a level that is, allows more of that in our drinking water. So the standard is set at a level that is inclusive of understanding the health concerns as well as the cost impact. And so what the result is that we have some levels in our water allowable that are over the strictly health protective level. So that's called the MCL goal or the maximum contaminant level goal. So EPA will publish both of these, but if you're looking at your annual water quality report, you'll just see the how your water compares to the maximum contaminant levels, which again are inclusive of the cost. So we said, from our perspective, we think really from the public's perspective, people want the best quality water, and they want those health protective levels. So we want to think about trying to achieve drinking water that is meeting those health-based goals in each case. And if you want an example of this, like PFAS, which has been in the news, lead is another one where essentially the science and the standard setting says we really shouldn't be exposed to any amount of these, at least some of the PFAS and lead in general. But because the cost is high, there's some allowable amount in the water. So it's just as an example. We see others like it. The other test that we want to see is that the water supplies are being monitored effectively, not just for those regulated contaminants, but emerging contaminants, because we know that the process of setting new standards really moves slowly, and often there are risks that science is telling us about, public health science, that take years or decades really to get into our regulatory scheme. So if we can have water systems that are more proactively looking at some of these emerging concerns, we can hopefully start to manage and reduce any exposure. And then thirdly, we want to see water supplies that are managed well. Watershed management practices are in place to really keep new sources of contamination out and to use the natural filtration that comes from the environment to the maximum effect to cleanse the water before it reaches the treatment plant. So that's sort of, just as a high level, kind of how we were thinking about protecting our drinking water. Um, So how is climate change going to impact drinking water? I think for, folks probably in this group, you're, well versed in a lot of issues around water, so these will probably be familiar. But I can tell you, as I go out and talk about them, they're not universally familiar. So uh, increasing water temperature as a start, right? We have good modeling to suggest like air temperature is likely to increase 5 to 11 degrees by the end of the century. That will inevitably lead to an increase in water temperature. We don't have great models to predict exactly how much, we can expect water temperature to go up, but certainly will go up. That'll also as we've I'm sure experienced in our own lives, the seasons are shifting, right? Summer starts earlier, lasts longer, or at least what we think of as summer. That warm season is longer. That's going to have a longer growing season, and that matters for things. Well, I'll get into, anything that grows in water is going to be affected by the temperature of that water. Sea level rise, not so for really an impact on Rockland's drinking water sources, but as you move up the river, those water sources that are drawing from the Hudson in the freshwater portion have to think about how sea level rise is going to push that salt front further north and how that might affect their water supply. So we actually prompted DEC to look at modeling those conditions so that those communities can have some good basis for understanding, how to plan into the future. Storm surge will also increase. Storm surge, of course, is like the pushing of tidal water up into onto our shorelines during storms. We have increasing precipitation. And I have to adjust my screen so I can see my own slides. Excuse me. There we go. Um, Annual precipitation overall will increase. That's again from this the climate assessments report for us here in New York State. Also, the frequency and intensity of extreme events will increase. So we're going to have more flooding. We're going to have more high, bursts of high intensity rain. At the same time, as Matt kind of referenced in the opening, we have more frequency of and intensity of short-term droughts, and we're in one, or at least at some scale. I don't know if there've been advisories listed yet, but it's certainly dry out there. Um, and then I think the one that is most important and in some ways, but also difficult to express is sort of the multivariable events, how these things stack up. If we get, if we have warmer water and we have a burst of intense precipitation followed by a drought, how do those events together lead to changes in water quality and create new risks or more intense or harder to manage risks that are present today? So there's some of the major climate change impacts that we are looking at that will affect water quality. As we look at some of the drinking water quality issues that will be affected by those changes, these are some of the ones that we're oops, that we are most interested in tracking and seeing communities start to plan around. So the first of these, actually, I'll flip these. I think harmful algal blooms. So, growth of algae we've already seen an increase both in the reporting of, but in the incidence of harmful algal blooms, and those are, as I'm sure you know, cyanobacteria. It's not really algae, it's bacteria, but these produce toxins that can be harmful if we're exposed to them from recreation or from drinking. So that those are becoming more prevalent and will become more common and intense. There'll be longer periods of blooms. They'll happen in more places, and they might last longer or be more intense. Um, any algae, whether it's harmful algae or other, can lead to an increased risk of disinfection byproducts. So these, if you're unfamiliar with these, this is a regulated contaminant that forms when organic matter in the source water is gets into the treatment process, and we dose it with chlorine to kill pathogens, but then the byproducts are formed from the treatment process. So those some of those byproducts are themselves harmful, and so they are regulated. And we see more and more communities having incidents of disinfection byproducts forming in their treatment systems. And one of the factors influencing that is the amount of organic matter from algae in the water. Also, warmer water temperatures will contribute to that. Certain contaminants will be mobilized in new ways due to various changes in the ecosystem that result from, everything from the soil's capacity to hold on to certain nutrients or I'm sorry, hold on to certain contaminants or release them is affected by wetting and drying cycles that can be impacted by the changes in precipitation patterns that we can expect. Um, for instance, and other flooding events also can mobilize contaminants that wouldn't otherwise enter water sources. And then, like I mentioned with salinity, we are tracking how, for the Hudson River water supplies, the changes in salinity could affect them. And then finally, treatment and distribution infrastructure. So your treatment plants, your pipes, the physical infrastructure itself, obviously also can be affected by some of these extreme events, whether it's flooding or wildfire, and that can disrupt the water supply as well. So one thing that, we see as an important way that we can make our water supplies more resilient with these changes that are coming is to recognize that our underlying pollution burdens are the thing that we can address. Like we can reduce those underlying pollution burdens now so that we're more resilient as these changes come from the climate change that will make them more harder to manage in the future. So some of the key variables, and again, these might not be in every case causing problems today, at the levels that they're found in our water sources. What we want to really highlight is that as the climate changes, the existing levels might be problematic. So the changes in the climate might make our existing water quality um, uh, levels insufficient to protect public health in the future and the near future. So among those excess nutrients, that's phosphorus and nitrogen are the major freshwater nutrients that are of concern. They can come from a variety of sources. Whether that's even treated sewage, typically the treatment process doesn't remove nutrients. So our effluent will have high levels of a nutrient, but also our septic systems discharging to our groundwater and then ultimately reaching surface waters in many cases can add nutrients to the water. Runoff from farms and our roadways and parking lots all can and our lawns can all add nutrients to the water. Erosion. So we have a lot of sources of potential sources of excess nutrients in our watersheds. Salinity, the major concern here is really road salt in our region. We've used a lot of road salt over the years, and in many cases, our groundwater is contaminated. So in conditions like this, where we have low flows in our streams, that low flow is groundwater dominated, and where that groundwater is contaminated with salt, we're going to have, particularly highly concentrated doses of sodium and chloride in our source waters, in conditions such as we have today with these droughts. Um, when it comes to toxic contaminants, every water source is going to have different risks. If you have groundwater contamination, for instance, just like I described with road salt, that groundwater contamination can enter streams at higher concentrations in these drought conditions. And then in any watershed, as I'm sure you're all familiar with, the land uses are going to heavily influence the quality of the water, based on what inputs those land uses are adding to the water or how well they are filtering the water before it flows downstream. And then finally, just the location of infrastructure is going to matter. If it's in a floodplain or if it's, in a fire risk area or something like that, that's going to be an underlying condition similar to an underlying pollution burden that can might have a, a greater risk going forward with as the climate changes. Here's a little graphic we put together that sort of tries to bring together some of the elements in our report. I'm not going to do much more than pause and let you glance at it, but it gets into some of the same issues that I just described. So to provide an example here, and I touched on this a little bit earlier, incidents of harmful algal blooms are increasing globally and in New York State. Increased reporting is one factor, but the incidence of these also, it seems to be increasing independent of our better reporting of them. Many lakes are affected in New York State, including drinking water sources. And it's important to note that cyanobacteria, that is for fresh water, what we call harmful algal blooms, can produce multiple types of toxins, neurotoxins, liver toxins. So these are, a significant concern that we want to keep out of our drinking water sources. So again, some of the underlying vulnerabilities in water supplies that can make a bloom more likely. nutrient loading, so how much of that phosphorus and nitrogen is reaching the water. Presence of zebra mussels, because zebra mussels preferentially eat other stuff and filter other stuff from the water, leaving the cyanobacteria alone. So that the presence of zebra mussels, which is an invasive species in our region, can increase the risk of a bloom. Concentrations of road salt, which is something that I learned only in, relatively recently, can, alter the chemistry in ways that will facilitate blooms. And then things like the mixing and flow rates. So if we've got warm water, and low flows right now, it's going to be more stagnant. You're going to have more likely to form blooms in those kinds of conditions. And then for drinking water supplies, the location of the intake can really matter. So if it's, near the surface versus deeper, if it's in different locations that might be more or less at risk of uh, intaking that water that's affected by a harmful algal bloom, that is a underlying, either a buffer or a risk factor. So with increased precipitation, we might have more runoff of nutrients, more inputs of nutrients. Higher water temperatures are going to facilitate the growth of algae. The shifting seasons will lengthen the window of time when that algae might grow. And then periods of drought, such as we're seeing now, can reduce the flow, reduce the mixing, or lead to more stagnant water. So warm, stagnant water with high nutrients, it's a good recipe for a bloom like this. And as I mentioned before, the even algae that's not harmful can be a concern for drinking water because it can react with chlorine in the treatment process and form those disinfection byproducts. Um, so this is just an example. So this is not actually from our water source, but this is up to your north. Wallkill River is a harmful algal bloom that we tracked back in 2016, and there've been a couple other blooms since that have been a little less extensive. But just to illustrate in our region some of the ways that this can play out. So we have in the Wallkill watershed large agricultural areas with a lot of erosion, a lot of fertilizer use. We also have a lot of large wastewater inputs, and again, those treated wastewater treatment plants, though, um, don't have permit conditions that require the reduction of phosphorus or nitrogen before discharge, so they are sources of high nutrients. So, and we also have high chloride levels from road salts. And then in that case, we have hydroelectric dams that both, hold back the water and let it pool up, which can create those stagnant conditions and warmer water conditions. Also, in some cases, have manipulated the flows of the river in ways that have, we think, facilitated these blooms. So again, in 2016, what we saw were really big spring rains that caused a lot of flooding, a lot of erosion, a lot of runoff, all those nutrients kind of entering the water. Then we had a summer similar to the one we're seeing now, although hotter. So we had a really hot August. It was a dry August, and so the water was very low. It was not flowing, got stagnant. The dams created these stagnant, nutrient-rich pools. Um, the algae bloomed. We had these algal blooms, and then we had evidence, I think, starting in mid-August, and it lasted into October. And so I think you can look at that as an example of the shifting seasons that we're seeing a bloom like that late in the season. Obviously, the impacts were pretty significant. 30 miles of the river. We were able to document high cyanotoxin levels, so not just the presence of the bloom and what appeared to be a bloom, but actually the toxins produced by those algae lasted over 60 days in different parts of the river over that time, and it did prompt the DEC DEC's credit to launch an initiative to develop a pollution diet for the river. It's a long-term process. We still don't have that plan, hoping to see it maybe this year, maybe next, but that will then start to ratchet down the amount of nutrients in the river as it's implemented. to again reduce the underlying pollution burden, which again is what I want to come back to is as a solution to making, in this case, the Wallkill River more resilient, but in the case of drinking water supplies, making them more resilient to climate change. Um, so this is just to illustrate that there's also so what I described there was sort of an example of cascading impacts, one driver after another, sort of adding up to an impact. We also have the issue of um, feedback loops. So where certain conditions will reinforce others in order to create greater risk. So in this case, warmer water can lead to reduced dissolved oxygen, and low dissolved oxygen conditions can lead to the increased rate of release of nutrients from sediments. And then you have warm water, you have higher sediments, and you have the likelihood of harmful algal blooms. That thick mat of algae on the surface of the water will both absorb more sunlight, lead to warmer water. It would also, as it dies off, can reduce dissolved oxygen further, which can then release the nutrients, and you can see how these cycles kind of continue. So this is just one example how little changes or big changes in the climate can kind of produce new cycles in our waterways that can lead to increased risks for drinking water quality. I want to emphasize that, everything that we're talking about focused on drinking water, they basically all have ecological impacts as well. So it's not the focus of our presentation or this report, but focusing on protecting our drinking water sources will also protect, water in the environment, aquatic life in the environment, and that's something that we at Riverkeeper value highly as well, and I believe the folks in the room probably do as well. So I think, I don't know, Matt, you tell me, I think I've gone a little longer than you intended, so I can pause here and we can talk, or I can go through a couple of sort of actions and policies that we're promoting that are relevant. What would you like?
Why don't we ask anybody if they've got any questions, and
Okay.
then we can continue from there after. If anybody got any questions for Dan?
I did have a question, if that's okay.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, so hi Dan,
but you
thanks
can't
for
make it
doing
too
this.
hard, Margie.
Never. Um, I was kind of intrigued by your comment about zebra mussels and the preferential eating. So are you saying that with less other material in the water column, there's more space for a cyanobacteria to just take over, or what do
Yeah.
they compete? Yeah, I'd love to hear more.
So as I understand it, and gets a step beyond my expertise, so I might not describe it fully accurately, but the zebra mussels we know are like voracious
Mhm,
filter feeders. So they're taking all the little microscopic bits out of the water. I guess
mhm,
they don't, my understanding is they don't like cyanobacteria. So as
mhm,
they filter other things out, you have the change in conditions, you've got greater light penetration, which
mhm,
is then good for the cyanobacteria that's left behind.
mhm.
And they're not competing, to whatever degree they would have with the other microscopic bits in the water. So you're just kind of changing the environment enough that it promotes their bloom. So I think this has been um, a factor in some of the Finger Lakes where there's been not necessarily high nutrient loading, but harmful algal blooms, and this has been looked
Mhm.
at as one of the factors that has contributed to that. One of the places I'm concerned about is the Croton Reservoir, which just had a recent invasion over the last couple of years of zebra mussels,
Mhm.
which arguably was a climate-induced event because it was a big flood that caused
Mm.
I believe, a breach of a dam
Yep.
upstream that allowed the zebra mussels that had invaded a smaller lake upstream to then migrate down into the Croton Reservoir. So now we have a highly nutrient-rich uh, reservoir, very important to a lot of our drinking water
Wow.
for the state, and now it's got zebra mussels. So we have to watch what happens.
Thank you so much. That's a great explanation. And I hadn't really thought about that increased light penetration, but certainly that has been something we notice in the Upper Hudson. So it makes a lot of sense. Thanks.
Yeah.
Great question, Marty. Good to see you. Um, anybody else? Anybody else got anything for Dan at this time? I was interested in how you set a pollution diet for, I believe, what was it, the Wallkill,
The Wallkill, yeah.
and wondering if we could
What is that?
piggy, yeah, kind of if
Yeah.
with our streams in Rockland, if that would be something that we could do also.
So that's a loose term, pollution diet. With the technical term in that case is a total maximum daily load, and that is a function of the Clean Water Act. So the Clean Water Act will require, excuse me, first assessment of the water to see how the water quality is, and then if there is a pollutant that is over a water quality standard, so in this case phosphorus nutrient in the Wallkill, um, the one of the remedies can be a pollution diet. So total maximum daily load, total, what is the total amount of phosphorus, the maximum total amount of phosphorus that can enter that river and not cause problems or not exceed that water quality standard. So in this case, what I would expect is we'll see, a bunch of spreadsheets and calculations to say this is the amount of phosphorus we think is entering from our wastewater treatment plants. This is the amount from agriculture. This is the amount from lawn runoff and urban runoff, and you put that all into a framework that allows you to then prioritize and say, well, most cost effective way to go from this much phosphorus to this much where we don't have impacts is to, increase our investment in farm best management practices this much and new technology to reduce phosphorus at our treatment plants this much, and that will, get us down to a level where we won't have harmful algal blooms. So that's I mean, it is a great concept and process. Um, it's not easy to get there for, I mean, you can say I'm worried about the Sparkle Creek or the Minnesiongo or whatever it is. That doesn't mean that all of the data and regulatory sort of framework is going to be there to have a pollution diet in that case. But it is, I think the concepts are relevant if you're thinking about what are the interventions, we can think about, and you can start to think about if nutrients, for instance, are the concern, then within that watershed, what are the likely inputs? Or is it dominated by I think, I'll be honest, when I think of Rockland County, I think it's going to be dominated probably by suburban and urban runoff, right? So that's what you would want to look at is what are the interventions that you can do in that landscape to reduce nutrient loading in that stream or that reservoir.
Great. Yeah. I like that though. I think a pollution diet is something that and maximum daily load people aren't going to get around, but a pollution diet I think would fit most of the general public.
Yeah. Well, you can
Uh,
tell me all the other phrases I used that were the wrong ones that went over everyone's head, and I'll stick to pollution diet. Um, But so actually, that's a good bridge if there aren't other questions immediately. So the drinking water source protection program, which I know Orangetown is engaged with right now, and maybe other communities in Rockland, I'm not sure. Um, but this is not going to be equivalent of a TMDL, but it is the goal of it is to look at the watershed that influences a water source and to try to identify what do we need to protect it or what do we need to do, to improve water quality if that's necessary. And it's a community-driven effort. I'm sure you've heard about it. I'm not going to go into depth about it, and I'm sorry for the applications line in that. That was a relic from a previous presentation. So I don't think applications are currently being accepted, but we have some experts in the room, Anna and Lauren, who work with communities here in Rockland and throughout the region who could talk more about this. But um, it is a free to communities program where the state provides technical assistance in the form of Lauren and others who help to guide you through understanding where's your water come from, what are some risks that might be affecting it, what can be done to better protect it, and then to try to come up with a plan that can achieve some improvement. So, this is a really important strategy. Rockland's a complicated place to do this. I think Orangetown is doing it, but it's part of, this larger countywide water system. So I think been questioning and kind of wrestling with how to do a town level plan when you have a regional water source. So in every case, there's certain challenges, but I think Rockland has some particular ones with the way the water's set up. Um, Other things that we are looking to do at the level of our state agencies, we have this law on the books called Watershed Rules and Regulations. It's a bedrock that helps New York City, for instance, protect its watershed far outside of its municipal limits. And for many of our communities, we're relying on water that the source is not within the municipal limits. So the community drinking the water is really limited with its land use control, what it can actually do to protect its water because that water doesn't come from within the community. It's just being consumed there. Watershed rules and regulations set up a framework for those communities downstream to enact, with the health department's help, some rules that help them protect their water upstream. But this law has not been effectively implemented outside of New York City and Syracuse for many decades. Most communities that even have these rules on the books, they're outdated and not really helpful. So we're looking to see this kind of reinvigorated and put to use. To try to fill some of the gaps that might be there, including those that are coming from climate change. We're looking to have both on the drinking water side with Department of Health and on the ambient water with DEC update water quality standards in order to better protect the public and the source waters from emerging concerns, and really not even just emerging concerns in some cases like road salt. We need some standards that are absent. DEC is in the process of setting some standards for phosphorus, which would be really positive. So we're looking to follow those processes through and advocate for increased protections from our bedrock Safe Drinking Water Act and Clean Water Act laws at the state level. Um, and then, for both agencies and nonprofit groups, we want to, develop more strategies to address the risks that I've talked about here. So what are those watershed management and protection practices that we can adopt and implement in more places and to do a better job with watershed management? And to make sure that the guidance that communities have going through the Drinking Water Source Protection Program is inclusive of things like these climate concerns so that they have all the data and the information they need to try to plan for the future state of their source waters as well as the current state. At the New York State Legislature, we'll be focusing in the next session on making sure that we address road salt. There's a lot of momentum now for some new state laws to kind of ratchet down and the amount of road salt we use. So not to stop using road salt, not to use an alternative, but just to use best management practices. So we're using a lot less to achieve safe roads. And this is being done in a lot of places, but not everywhere. So we're trying to accelerate the adoption of those best management practices. And then, as always, we're going to be looking to just fund some of our really core state funding programs, the Clean Water Infrastructure Act and the Environmental Protection Fund, chief among them. And the Environmental Protection Fund is the source of funding for the Hudson River Estuary Program, which in our region is like top priority to make sure it gets all the funding we can argue for. And I just want to end with this. Because a lot of these challenges seem really difficult. And I feel, daunted sometimes by the challenges when you think about current state of water, future state. But our region has really been a part of some innovations over, really fundamental innovations for the country, even the world. And I think it's good to remember that. So I won't run through all of these. But, I'll just, Poughkeepsie, my favorite. If you go into the treatment plant, there's a plaque on the wall and it says first in filtration. And it was around the time of the Civil War. They actually had to delay the project because of the Civil War. But they were known as the sickly city because the well water that was the source for the city was, producing cholera outbreaks and it was horrible. So they turned to the Hudson as the water source at that time. but with filtration, with slow sand filtration. They were the first to use that technique. Now, that or similar is a common practice. Similarly, Jersey City, not not a New York community, but a Hudson River community, was the first to use chlorine. So we've been innovators in treatment, and then with New York City's watershed protection program was held up as a global model for how to protect water at its drinking water at its source. And now our state drinking water source protection program, we're also innovators in protecting the watersheds that we need to have healthy water. So I think we've done it before, we've innovated, we've been leaders, and that's kind of the moment calls for us to do again. And whether you like it or not, I'm done. Got to ask questions.
I have a question, Matt, if I could jump in with a question.
Sure, go.
Um, Hi, Dan.
Hey,
Nice to see you. It's been a long
nice
time.
to see you.
How
Has
are
been
you?
a long time.
Yes. 303D list, the impaired water body list. I don't know if you guys do any work with that. The
Yeah.
state recently updated that list. We had a couple of water bodies that were removed from the impaired water body list here in Rockland County. And the reason I was told, because they were originally on the list because of unknown biological impacts, and
Right.
because there's no water quality standard for biological impacts, they were removed.
Mhm.
But once they were removed, people are saying, oh, they're not impaired any longer.
Right.
But nothing has changed. They're still
Exactly.
impaired. So I'm just wondering your thoughts on that, if you guys are
Mhm.
doing any work on that,
Yeah.
how, because from a land use planning perspective, we try to point that out in development when we look at
Mhm.
development impacts. If a development is along that section of the Pascack Brook, for example, which was an impaired water body, but now is no longer on the list. So
Yeah.
I think you get my question. I think.
Yep. No, thank you for asking. It's a great question. And it ties in with what Matt was asking about the pollution diet too. So the 303D list, 303D is like a part of the Clean Water Act. But it's the impaired waters. So it's that list of waters that have exceeded a water quality standard and should have some sort of, ideally some kind of plan to rectify that. So in the case of the Wallkill, it was on the 303D list, the impaired waters list for phosphorus, and now there's a pollution diet being developed. These examples Rich has cited were put on the list a couple decades ago because the macroinvertebrate data that was gathered, so the bugs and worms, showed that it wasn't healthy. The ecosystem was not healthy, but it wasn't known exactly what was causing it. I think that the data can suggest certain causes, but isn't tied to a specific chemical or parameter that can be tested in the water quality. It's not. So I think DEC's rationale was we want to clean up our list and we want the list to just be inclusive of waters where we have water quality data that shows an exceedance of a water quality standard. And for macroinvertebrates, they couldn't make that, direct tie. We argued that in those cases, there were other examples with that update to the list. They wanted to remove PCB impacted waters because it's the fish that where the PCBs show up as a concern, right? If we eat the fish, that's where the contaminants reach us. But the ambient water wasn't exceeding a PCB standard in every case, or there wasn't data to show, so they wanted to remove those. There were a few other examples. We argued against that. EPA also pushed back on a number of them, and I'm afraid I don't remember exactly kind of which categories the EPA pushed back on. I think those streams with the macroinvertebrate justification will still be kept off of the next list, if I remember right. But the state is doing what's called a triennial review of all of its water quality standards. Triennial means every 3 years, but it hasn't happened in New York in not 3 decades, but closer to decade scale than a year scale. So it's great that they're doing it. And there is an opportunity in that to establish a standard that would be, where you could look at the macroinvertebrates and have it, indicate a water quality violation so that line up everything so that the reality that the stream's unhealthy, as indicated by the bugs and worms that are living in it is recognized as an impairment and then can, hopefully at least lead to, if not a cleanup plan, at least at the local level, like you're describing, some planning efforts that help to move towards a restored stream. So you've identified an issue. It's a live issue. Those are some of the things that we're trying to push on to, get to the right place, but it's sort of like not resolved.
Yeah. For now, I mean, if you go to the DEC info, it's basically saying they're unassessed. So,
Hmm.
in
Yeah,
fact,
and it's frustrating, like you said. Like I think I totally share your view. It's like, okay, we identified at some point in the past the stream had a problem. Now we're sort of changing the way we're thinking about defining the what is a problem, but it doesn't mean that doesn't have a problem anymore. It just means we
exactly
haven't assessed it with
right.
updated data recently or something.
Yeah.
So,
It's like
you
if
know,
we ignore it, the problem will go away.
right, right.
Uh,
And especially it's a good, I hadn't thought of actually, I don't think we put into our comments either. So I'm glad you raised it, Rich, too, that list has that impact can have a list at the impact at the local level where it can influence planning decisions. So if you take it off the list, it's not just what is the state doing to make a cleanup plan, which it can't do for every stream that has poor macroinvertebrate data, but Rockland County or an Orangetown or whatever can use that data to plan well. So without it on the list, you lose that ability.
Exactly. Yes. Thank you.
Yeah.
hey, Dan, any other besides macroinvertebrates? I mean, is there any other contaminants that you think should have been added or are not on our pollution diet, so to speak?
Well, we hired a PhD water quality scientist not too long ago, so we submitted a long list of ideas. I could send it to you if you want, but I can't recite it. But I think that, the big things, I think the fundamental things are that I have top of mind are related to road salt nutrients, PFAS. Um, those are probably, the big three. Certainly where it comes to drinking water, I think those are important variables that we should be looking harder at and doing more on. And again, to DEC's credit and others, we're going to have some phosphorus standards soon, or at least guidance values that will do some good. We've got some action on road salt. And PFAS as well. But those are the ones to make the most progress on fastest, I think. But there are a bunch of more novel contaminants that are of concern. There's that chemical that comes off tires. I can never remember all the numbers and letters about 6 ppd DE or something, right? So there are always new concerns that are coming up, and the standards and regulations have a lag time to try to catch up. And so we try to be in the middle of those two, understanding the science and try and push for the regulation.
Okay, great. Yeah, if you get a chance, send us that list. That would be
Sure.
interesting. Although, to be honest with you, I probably won't recognize hardly any of the materials in it. We did a water test one time at Rockland Country Club. I think the state, not the state, the county, because we were getting into a plume. There was a hazardous years and years and years ago. There must have been a hazardous problem, and they were trying to find a plume, and we had a well, and I got the results from that water test, and it was like 3 pages of things in the water that I couldn't tell you what they were. So it's very, very interesting. And I can see why you would need a PhD to do water quality. Uh, Anybody else have any questions? And I do think too, kind of not hearing any, I'm going to gab for a little bit here, but I think one of the issues that we have as a group and as speaking to the choir with this group of great people we have here is that we've done the easy stuff already.
Yeah.
I think we've put our finger in the pipe that was polluting the rivers and the streams, and we've stopped that. Now we're into the hard things to really get a grasp around, but we really, really need the public input and really need to educate the public, and
Hmm.
in some senses change human behavior. So that's
Yeah. Well,
That's
I agree. I mean, I think broadly that's the case. I think I would say, and we're going to try to do a better job as Riverkeeper to come to forums like this with sort of some policy recommendations, that can be or priorities at the local level. But I'll preview. I'm going to be talking to the task force some point soon. I forget when. About road salt, but the DEC started a new grant program, or added a new category of grants in the last couple of rounds of its water quality improvement grants, which are available, as part of the CFA each year, the combined funding application. So around June, July, it is when the applications are due. So now would be a good time to start planning. And I saw a bunch of folks from highway departments on the call, to really work, talk with the highway crews about what's being done now, what could be done, because one of the ways that state program can be used is apply at a town level or county level or probably a watershed level, probably any grouping that you could imagine to say we want to develop a road salt reduction plan, and then the plan can then be implemented with the same grant program. So the things that I think about are switching from like rock salt to brine. That takes infrastructure upgrade, or these they're plows that are better technology that feel the changes in the road. So it's not like so they're more responsive to road conditions. So there's some best management practices that I think are pretty common and can probably be adopted pretty widely. And then there's some specific concerns that might show up on particular roadways where you have cold spots or shading or things like that. So the plan can kind of put those pieces together, and then you can start to fund the infrastructure upgrades you need by buying new trucks or new plows or the brine equipment, things like that. But I think that feels like with that program now in place, it's something that communities at the level of the town, village, and county can really think about getting started with. And really, it's really important. I think it's important for all our streams. Globally, scientists, some of the same scientists that identified acid rain as a concern generation ago, have said the salinization of our freshwater streams is a huge ecological problem. So whether you're thinking about a drinking water source or the stream that's running through the community, reducing that salt load now is really, really important thing that I think really comes down to a lot of the local uh, inputs from the salting that happens at the town and county level. And then meanwhile, we'll be working at the state level to try and get the state DOT to adopt those practices widely as well. So if you want to look for one, I would say, that's a great one for a group like this to think about and start to work on.
great. Thanks very much.
Sure thing. No, thanks for teeing up the grandstanding.
Well, it's great to have you, and we certainly want to keep Riverkeeper as a close ally. And great to have you here and talking this morning. I mean, it's absolutely awesome to have the Hudson River in our backyards. I mean, from a community standpoint, business standpoint, all of the above. I mean, it's just we're lucky to have it. So
Yeah.
we need to keep all that the Hudson River and all our other water in as clean and pristine condition as we can for everybody's benefit. So if nobody else has any questions, we'll let Dan. You're welcome to hang on if you want to hear some
Hey,
of our business. But
I see one from Ray
hey,
here.
oh,
hey,
go
Dan,
for it.
Dan, do you work with the Hudson River Fishermen's Association at all?
Yeah, well, so Riverkeeper, started as the Hudson River Fishermen's Association, 1966, and then I forget exactly the mechanics, but we ended up adopting Riverkeeper as the brand and the name of the organization in the early '80s, I think it was, and then the New Jersey Fishermen's Association or the Hudson River Fishermen's Association remains as the Jersey chapter. So yeah, we work with them. We definitely we've lobbied together in Albany. That's the place where I've most often seen Gil and some of the others. But there's some other ways we collaborate as well.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I'm sorry, what's next, Matt? I don't know if I can stay on, but I might be interested if I can.
Oh, just our typical business that we do to.
Uh, well, I'd love to, but actually I realize I have to jump to another meeting. But thank you very much for the invitation and thanks for the time. I really appreciate it. Great to see you all.
Just
Great to have
Dan,
you.
if you look in the chat, Dan, I put something about the University of Wisconsin, Milwaukee, with the School of Freshwater Sciences.
Oh,
I was
great.
just there for a tour, and they're doing research on, and especially like identifying E. coli in waters to try to develop a new, rather than a 24-hour delay, trying to find
Mm,
immediately if the E. coli levels, and also to pinpoint where it's coming from,
yeah,
what kind of
that's
animals coming from, or humans.
so important. Yep. Thank you. I'll look that up and share it with our science team. Thanks again, everyone.